players gather to cast powerful spells, some of the oldest and most powerful in the history of Magic the Gathering. Doomsday, Beseech the Mirror, Echo of Eons, and many others. Battling head-to-head in brutal combat, they all have one thing in common: to uphold their legacy and the search for eternal glory.
The Eternal Glory podcast is brought to you by the minds behind BoshNRoll on YouTube, Thraben University, and theepicstorm.com. This episode is sponsored by 3-for-1 Trading and Sparks Law Practice.
Hello, and welcome to episode 123 of the Eternal Glory podcast, Attack of the Mailbags. We've already recorded 30 minutes of introduction and banter for the week, available in our supporter-exclusive pre-show. Check out patreon.com/eternalglory to gain access, or join as a YouTube member for the same content on YouTube instead. As always, I'm Phil Gallagher, aka ThrabenU.
I am Brian Coval, aka BoshNRoll.
And I am Bryant Cook of the Epic Storm.
Shout out to our new Patreon and YouTube members. Since the last episode, we've got Abe Alpha, Kurt S., Sir Stickbug, that's their real name, I'm sure, and Terrence C. jumping in since the last episode. I know at least two of these people submitted questions this week for the mailbag, so if you want access to mailbags and pre-show and all that stuff, get in there.
Well, of course, Sir is their name. They're probably related to Sir Ginger. That's how names work, right?
This Sir is with an I, not a Y, so maybe deep family lineage, but they're not close relatives.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense.
I've met some Covals with a K, kind of the same thing.
This episode is brought to you by Sparks Law, a business transactional law firm owned by Eternal Magic community member Jonathan Sparks. If you're an entrepreneur, business owner, or gig worker looking to start up your own company, Sparks Law can help you with partnership agreements, contract reviews, intellectual property protection, or any other business legal questions. If you want to shape up your business strategy with a fellow Eternal gamer, reach out via email to jsparks, that's JSPARKS, at sparkslawpractice.com, or call 470-268-5234. This episode is also sponsored by 3-for-1 Trading, one of Europe's leading Magic the Gathering traders. Their online shop has a fantastic selection of high-end Magic cards, especially for vintage, legacy, and old-school players. You can find them at shop.3for1trading.com or visit their booth at major events. They run weekly sales, and new, individually scanned high-end cards are added every Wednesday. You can use code Eternal Glory to gain our community-exclusive offer of free worldwide shipping on your first order over $500 and experience their world-class customer service and exact rating for yourself.
And if you would like to advertise to over 10,000 Eternal gamers every episode, reach out to us. We're always accepting new sponsors.
And with that, let's open the bag. Question 1 comes from Travis N. And this is a big question, kind of long in its words, but this is going to be one of the bigger ones, and I wanted to lead on it. I'm struggling to find a group of people in my area willing to give Legacy a legitimate try. I've tried the Legacy Pit approach of having lots of different decks for folks. I've encouraged proxy play, and yet no one in my area wants to give it a chance because they believe the format ends in too many games on turn 1. Many of these folks have not given Legacy a thought for a decade or more. I know MTGO is an option, but there's something about paper play that is more enticing for me. I was able to build my Legacy collection due to overbuying in my early years, and selling many Commander staples for credit with stores and slowly turning them into duels, and putting more money into the format for a second location online is not an exciting thought to me as a public school teacher. Breach. Is driving 2-ish hours from north central West Virginia to Pittsburgh really the best option? I mean, shout out Pittsburgh Legacy scene. It is actually dope, but 2 hours is a long drive. Or do you have any advice on other ways I could entice local folks to give the format a shot? At this point, I'm almost ready to sell out and make the jump to a different game, not because of money, but because of how disheartening it is. I love the game and format so much, I just can't pull the trigger.
So this is a tough one. I'm going to approach this from the financial side of things first, because I too am a public school teacher. And for years, I avoided buying into Magic Online because of the financial burden. And immediately, within a couple of days of me pulling the trigger and spending, at the time it was, I think, $700 to buy Death and Taxes online, like, immediately I just realized that it was one of the best decisions that I had made because of the amount of extra practice I was going to be able to get, the amount of extra playtesting versus truly good players that I was going to get. Like, looking back, that $700 that I put into Magic Online was an investment into all of my future tournament results and really into this like content creation career that I have now. And while you maybe won't get that same degree of return out of investing into Magic Online, there are rental programs where you don't have to throw hundreds of dollars immediately at something. You know, you can pay $20 or something like that and get access to at least some legacy, try it out online, see how you feel about it. The Magic Online portion is a great option, but let's see if we can maybe find some other things to talk about as far as the physical Magic cards go.
Right. Before we move on from this section, though, I grouped these two questions together because Bobby asked, I play paper Legacy at my LGS on a regular basis. I've been playing since 4th edition, have all my staples like Duels and Fourths of Wills. I've never played MTGO because it feels like having to start over since I'd have to buy rent cards online that I already have in paper. How can I make MTGO accessible? And what's the best way for me to see if I like it? So let's answer Bobby's question inside of Travis's question, and then we'll finish Travis's question because we're already kind of there.
I mean, the answer is Card Hoarder, right? Like, Card Hoarder is just like the best. So if you wanted to try Magic Online, I mean, you can spend $20 and that gives you every single deck in the format that you're able to try for a week. And if you like it, you can then say, oh, well, maybe I don't need 1,000 tickets a week. Maybe I can go down to 400 tickets a week. And now it's only 8 tickets. And at the end of the month, you might 4-1 3 leagues, and all of a sudden you change from paying with your credit card to paying with tickets, and now you've gone infinite because you only need to 4-1 a couple leagues to pay for your card hoarder account with tickets. And I understand a 4-1 on Magic Online where your opponents are a lot better. Seems a little daunting, but it happens. Like, if you truly think that your paper skills hold up, Magic Online will pay for itself, which sounds kind of scary and maybe untrue, but if that's not the case, then it's, like Phil said, an investment in your future. And I think Magic Online is truly just the best way.
Also, the try it and see if I like it part of it, you don't have to play Legacy. I just pulled up the Pauper metagame on MTG Goldfish. The number one deck in Pauper, which is Goblin Rabblemaster Burn, costs 40 tickets. And a ticket is slightly less than $1. If we're converting it to dollars, it's probably like $32 to $35. And that's a dumb aggro deck. If that doesn't appeal to you, the second best deck in Pauper, Boros Synthesizer, is a grindy control deck and costs 55 tickets, which is probably $45 to $48. Like, if you are serious about finding another outlet to play and get better and everything, this 55 ticket investment in a top tier Pauper deck to get familiar with the league structure, tournament structure, the UI, everything, that's all very easy to do. And then if you like that much, then go ahead and get that card hoarder account and jump into Legacy. Plus, we just did an episode, one of our last 2 episodes before this one, where we talked a lot about Magic Online and the things they're rolling out. And they have a bunch of pre-cons now that you could just buy. It's just like a Legacy deck in a box that you could just get in the store on Magic Online, and off you go. There's a Pauper deck in there as well. And all these resources are there. Magic Online is kind of at the peak it's ever been of wanting to appeal to new players and giving you routes to get in.
Back to Travis's original question. Syracuse, New York used to be a hotbed for Legacy. MTG, the source, was partially founded here in Syracuse. So growing up, I got into Legacy because that's what everyone played. And over the years, people moved away. They, had kids, switched jobs, whatever. And Syracuse now has, I believe, 8 game stores. There are 0 local Legacy events. Not a single one of those stores has a Legacy event. But through Magic Online, I am playing the most Legacy I've probably ever played. Partially because of content creation, but also just because I can play late at night when I have time. And if no one in your area truly wants to play with you, and I think offering full proxy, the last store that did Legacy here, it was getting 14 to 20 people, and it was full proxy pre-pandemic lockdown. And after the pandemic, it never fired back up. But full proxy was the way to go. And if that doesn't work in your area, it's not an accessibility issue for the format. It's just lack of interest. And I don't know if there really is. Convincing people that are not interested to play anymore, as disheartening as that sounds.
The ultimate bottom line here is, why would they? And the answer to that is always what is supported in the area. If these are Magic players who want to show up at the game store and compete for prizes, then the game store needs to run Legacy. I personally don't want to play any Magic without something on the line. Like, I'll play a casual EDH game, but if someone's like, you want to just jam pre-modern? I have 10 decks with me. No thanks. I'm just going to, rest until the next round or whatever, or I'm on my way to dinner, or I just don't want to do that. Honestly, just that's my real answer. And if you're like at standard FNM or at modern FNM or wherever you're going, and you're like, you want to give Legacy a shot just between rounds, I can't imagine many people would just want to do that for the love of the game, even though Legacy's dope. I wouldn't want to play Legacy in between modern rounds at a modern tournament either. And I love Legacy. That's just a really hard sell for anyone.
So when I moved to Roanoke, which is where Star City Games physically is, like their paper store, there was not a Legacy scene there. But they were putting on Legacy Classics at the time, which was a Sunday tournament that was kind of a big deal. And we had 4 or 5 of us who were traveling to play in these Classics. And when other people saw us traveling, playing in those Classics, having a lot of fun on these trips, they started to gain some interest because they had a reason beyond just like the local level to want to learn this tournament. Maybe the sell for some of these people can be like, hey, if you learn Legacy, you could go to Eternal Weekend. You could go to this Buffalo Chicken Dip event. You could go to, this NYSE Open next year. Maybe you have to sell them something beyond just like, hey, this format is cool. You can do some really cool things. Maybe if you can't sell them on the gameplay, try to sell them on some travel.
Yeah, and living in West Virginia, which is obviously not going to apply to the majority of our listeners, but you asked the question, Pittsburgh does have an incredible Legacy scene, and maybe you don't drive up here every Thursday night to win a duel land at Titan Games or every month to win a duel at the Vault, but Titan Games is having their 10-year celebration in June. I think it's June. Please don't kill me if I'm wrong. Just look at their website. But they have a 10-year celebration coming up where first prize is a Mox Jet for a Legacy tournament. Is that worth driving 2 hours for? I mean, if the people around you have a competitive bone in their body and are interested in that sort of grind, that might be the sell rather than, come on, try it, it's fun. Okay, the next group of questions, I kind of grouped these together. There's 2 that are directly related and then 2 that piggyback off that. From Yay FF Tij, all right, this is just a bunch of letters. Would love to hear y'all's thoughts on card designs and how they can do impact Legacy and Magic as a whole. Sub-question from Corey. How do you feel about the wave of newer cards that are becoming more playable and pushing out older archetypes? And then after this, we have 2 questions about Modern Horizons 3, and we'll do those next. But first off, Yay Fdij and Corey. Let's start with them.
I love it. I absolutely love all of the new toys that we get to play with. And if Legacy didn't get new powerful cards, we would have an incredibly stale solved format. Like, I love that a couple times a year we get new life injected into the format. And I know it is sad to see that your Smallpox deck or your Metal Worker deck that you like grew up with and you have very fond memories of like gets power crept out of the format. But you can often keep doing something in the same vein, even if some of your favorite cards and favorite strategies get pushed out.
And before we're accused of shilling for WotC or whatever, who we receive no money from, just to be clear, Phil built an entire website and brand on Death and Taxes, and that deck sucks ass at this point. And he's shifted his brand onto like Ancient Tomb, Stompy kind of stuff and Fun Brews, and he's just somewhere else now. And if anyone has a reason to be mad that their deck doesn't play anymore, and Phil put a lot on the line for Death and Taxes over the years.
For sure. And I feel like a lot of people are like, I don't like that Legacy's become dual lands, Brainstorm, Source of Plowshares, Force of Will, plus new threats. Like, I read that like once a month on Reddit. And I do agree with Phil that it's good to see Legacy get new things to shake it up. But also, things were always going to change. There was always going to be new sets. And old cards do not necessarily mean that they're better than new cards just because they were printed first. Like, power creep has existed since the beginning of Magic. You can go back to the early days of like, oh my god, they printed Boldarian Horror or whatever instead of, that might not even be the right name of the card. Balduvian Horror?
The 4-mana 5/5? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So like power creep has existed since the beginning of the game. And now it's obviously pushed a little bit more, but it was always going to accelerate over time. And I remember being a really young kid and loving Rug Threshold and Legacy, and I thought there would never be anything better than Werebear. And then Tarmogoyf came. Just because something has shifted since the era of Star City games doesn't mean that it didn't happen before then. And I feel like that's a common thing with a lot of Legacy players nowadays is they remember the Star City era as like the beginning of time when it had happened prior to Star City era too. And things were always going to, happen. So I've repeated myself at this point, but that's how I feel.
Right. My take on this, I really appreciate when sets are designed around standard and limited. And then once in a while, like we just get something that trickles down into Legacy role player role, or even like Dreadhorde Arcanist came through standard and that card's banned now. Like I like when something built around one thing, like Dreadhorde Arcanist was built around flashing back pump spells onto your Feather in your Boros standard aggro deck. And then they're like, oh shit, Ponder. Whoops, we got to get that out. I love that. I love that natural progression of things built around one thing and then we break it somewhere else. I'm less interested in cards designed for eternal play. Like I am pro Modern Horizons. Like I'm not one of these people who's like, this ruined the game, because I don't believe that to be true. But I do think it's kind of uninspired to just build around a different thing and design cards specifically to splash in eternal formats. I think that kind of is whack overall.
Since we're talking about Modern Horizons here, the original Modern Horizons 1 pitch cycle. So we have Force of Negation, Force of Vigor, Force of Despair, and then 2 other bad ones. And Force of Despair might even be 3, so 3 bad ones. But that cycle to me felt like those were cards that Modern needed. The format was very fast. There was not a lot of ways to check combo. The Elemental set, I'll be honest, I don't really love them. I feel like they're not very fun to play against, and it doesn't matter which one, it's pretty much all of them. Like, I play them in my decks, I play them in my videos, but even playing them is unfun. So they're unfun to play and play against. What I like about Modern Horizons 3, and we've only seen a couple of them at this point, it doesn't feel like these cards are broken. We've seen the green one, which is Cultivate. Ooh, Cultivate. The red one is Flame of Duplication, so you sacrifice a red creature and copy a spell. Assuming that this is even real. Like, let's assume that the leak is real. Alright, so you're going to sacrifice your Goblin Guide and copy a Fire Blast? Okay, so that seems fine enough to me. That doesn't seem like a card that's going to break any format. And then the blue one is sacrifice a blue creature and counter a spell. I don't think that's going to see competitive play over any of the other dozens of playable counter spells that exist in this format, or even Modern. Like, it's going to be a role player. So it seems like Wizards has recognized, or at least the creator team, that they needed to step back the cards a little bit because the previous cycle was too much. I don't know if you guys agree with me, but I liked seeing the lower power creep on the free cycle in Modern Horizons 3.
Yeah, we've done full episodes about this in the past, and I don't want to retread all that old territory, but most of the power in the Modern Horizons releases and straight to Modern releases are in backstops, where they're all made to slow games down. Like Bryant mentioned, all of the pitch spells are like removal or counter spells. Even the pitch elementals are all removal counter spells or Tormod script. Plague Engineer. If your deck is full of X1 creatures and there's no room for a removal spell, you're up to no good and you must be stopped. Like, all of the power level was in those places. And then also Hogak. Whoops. But in general, that's where the power level lies in those sets. And I think they've done a good job slowing down games and giving us fun things to think about. Though, like, I don't think they have botched it or ruined Legacy or Modern in any real way. But I don't really like kind of a forced rotation of specifically Modern, where Modern Horizons 2 was actually pretty egregious, where every card in that set shifted an archetype and forced Modern to change, where my whole appeal of Eternal formats is I like being able to play my deck for 2 or 3 years and think about like, oh, this is a new 1-drop with flying. Is this good enough for Delver? And the other 56 cards stay the same. I don't like suddenly having to figure out what Fury, Solitude, Murktide, Regent, Ragavan mean for me all at once.
So let's take a look at the next two Modern Horizon related questions then. So from Kyle, what is on everyone's MH3 bingo card? What are some predictions you have for the set? And from James, what are you hoping for from MH3? Little changes, some archetypes revitalized.
So this is a little awkward, and I want to get ahead of it because leaks have come out, and I generally have a policy of not discussing leaks until they're officially released. I think that's just, respectful to everyone who worked on the set, and also we don't know if it's real. Wizards has already actually came out and said Brainstorm is not in Modern Horizons 3 because that was released in one of the leaks. Brainstorm and Crop Rotation were both in there, and that could have just been someone being an asshole. And Wizards has said, you're not getting Brainstorm in Modern. They had to address the leak for some reason. So there's a little bit of friction on this question between when it was asked and when we're answering it. I have personally no bingo card. I am a take it as it comes kind of person. I spend no energy in my life saying like, oh, I wish Wizards would design this card to solve this problem just for me. I just have no interest in that exercise. And normally it ends up with a stupid card that doesn't actually make sense in the game, and it's just someone mad that they keep losing to burn or whatever. I just take no joy in this exercise, and no offense, Kyle, but I don't know. I'm going to enjoy the spoilers as they roll out, and I'm going to see what it does to my decks on the other side.
I'm very much in Brian's camp where I don't think, oh, if only this black -2/-2 card existed would solve this matchup. I don't really think that way. I'd rather just look at what exists and try to enjoy the format or the card pool as it exists for the time that I have it. And then, 2 months from now, there will be a new card pool and there will be a meta shift. And I spend a lot of my time thinking of ways that I can increase win percentages with what I have rather than what I don't have.
So I was asked this question for an article recently, and my response was, I want more, air quotes, blazing root wallas. And what I mean by that is I want more cards that I can build around that maybe revitalize, give an archetype a shot in the arm, but don't necessarily break the format wide open. And with the large number of previews that WotC pushed forward in their sort of spoiler leak addressing article that they pushed out today, I think we are going to get a lot of those. I am very excited about a lot of those cards, especially white of the Reliquary. My jimmies have been rustled by the set already.
I sent that card to several people and I was like, are you going to start playing Modern again? Because that's the type of card that people from 10 years ago love.
Yep. I'll just say my hope is that they don't cheapen Magic's legacy with a bunch of empty throwbacks to inside jokes that vaguely resemble old cards. I believe we've officially spoiled Frozen Orb, which is like Winter Orb, but only for non-basic lands. And I guess that's a cool tool. Winter Orb, obviously inappropriate for Modern. Okay. But all the jokes where it's like Pondering Mage, where it's like, it's a 5-drop 3/3 that casts Ponder when it comes into play. Okay, whatever. And what I don't want is shit like Ravenous Giant. That's just a color-shifted Juzam Djinn. It's 2 red. It's from Modern Horizons 1. And it's an uncommon. It's just, 5/5 for 4 that deals 1 to you in your upkeep. Piece of shit. Just ruins everything that was ever cool about Juzam Djinn. Now that we have this stupid thing, just skip that stuff. Let the cool stuff be cool from the past and give us cards we want to play with. Okay, next question. Aaron M. How much of a deck list is, quotes, objectively correct, and how much is based on personal playstyle?
So I was actually talking about this earlier with another Storm builder, and they asked how I deal with people questioning their card choices. And for the most part, I tell people, play whatever makes you happy. They'll be like, oh, well, why don't you play this over that? And I'm like, well, here's my reason why. But if you want to try that, do whatever makes you happy. Because ultimately, my time is better spent not trying to convince someone else to do what I believe is correct. Because half the time, I second guess my card choices anyway. I'm never 100% sold on a given 75. And if you look at the Epic Storm over the last 5 or so years, I've rotated out a lot of cards, including ad nauseum. There was points where I didn't play Brainstorm or Chrome Box or whatever. And I don't think anything is ever objectively correct because it could always change. But with a part of this question that irks me a little bit is based on personal play style, I'll receive comments from people that are like, oh, well, I cut this card due to my personal play style or because I couldn't figure out how to make it work. It's like, well, instead of trying to take something and add training wheels to it, why don't you elevate yourself so that way you don't need the training wheels anymore? And that's the way that I've always looked at something. Like, you should put in the extra effort to figure it out rather than try to make it easier, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. And this comes up in coaching sessions a lot. Like, I had one person who every deck that he put in front of me just had 4 Leyline of the Void in the sideboard. And I'm like, you're a blue cantrip deck. You don't want to be mulling to Leyline of the Void. Why don't you put 2 surgicals in there? And he's like, I was just boarding it every match, even when I knew it wasn't good, and just firing it off on random spells in the graveyard. And I can't trust myself with a surgical reaction or surgical extraction. It's like, nah, I don't take that. You're going to learn how to play surgical extraction and have a better deck for it. So I agree with Brian on making a deck dumber and worse because you think you can't play it. I don't like that. But definitely through the Miracles era, I think if you look at my history of how I've built control decks versus Anzi's ways he builds control decks, might be playing like 70 of the same 75 cards and doing things completely differently. And he's like playing a ton of Terminuses. I didn't even own a Terminus on Magic Online until like last year. And I like Monastery Mentor and pushing my advantage once I have it. He likes drawing more cards once he has advantage to make sure he never loses the advantage. And just, there's a lot of stuff like that where if you take my Monastery Mentor control deck and play it like Anzi plays his control decks on his stream, you're going to lose a lot. The playstyle's fine, making changes based on that's fine, but make sure you know what the plan actually is.
I feel like one of the most common phrases I say in my conclusion after I play a deck on my channel is, I don't know if, I don't know how many. Like, I feel like as I am deck building and as I am learning, I don't have that, like, I am 100% sure that this is correct. And, you know, if you get tons and tons and tons of reps in on the same deck, you know, you can probably say, this is better than that. This is stronger than this. This is better positioned in the metagame than this. But there have been very few times in my entire life where I felt like I have just walked into a tournament with the objectively correct 75.
Right. And there's some stuff where, like, I was challenged to build a Megrim deck for my channel. Whenever someone discards a card, they take 2. And I built this whole deck, played this whole league, and I just got 100 YouTube comments that were like, Liliana's Caress is the same card, but costs 2 instead of 3 as Megrim. I'm like, oh, well, that would have been better. Sometimes there's spots like that where there is some level of, you know, strictly betterness. But yeah, build your decks. What makes you happy? There are not lives on the line. Try stuff if you think you know something better than the hive mind. Maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong, but you won't know till you play it. Next question. Harrison of the Blood Crypt Boys. Hey guys, I was hoping to hear your thoughts on my predicament and thought other people might have faced something similar. I've been wanting to switch out of 8 cast to play decks like Rescaminator and Sultai Beans, which require that I buy into duels. I am fortunate enough to be able to afford duels at all, but I'm not in a position to buy a playset of Caesar Volks at the drop of a hat. I decided on Beans and started to slowly acquire the duels, but as that's happened, the meta has shifted away from the deck I'm working toward. Should I be slowly buying duels one at a time, or saving to make a big purchase when the time is right? Would love to hear your thoughts on this and the process of buying duels in general.
I don't think that buying duels is a bad investment, regardless of if the metagame is shifted away towards whatever Beanstalk deck you're building anyway. I was just looking at Goldfish yesterday, and the 5-color Beanstalk / Bug Beanstalk deck was already back up to the 3rd most popular archetype. Like, there's always going to be ebbs and flows, and I wouldn't put too much stock in worrying if your deck is going to be the flavor of the week or the flavor of the month. You can't really go wrong with building a tiered deck. Like, it might shift down a little bit, but that's not the end of the world. In fact, I'm looking at it right now. I decided to pull it up. The 4 to 5 color Beanstalk decks plus the Bug Beanstalk decks are the 2nd most played deck right now. So in the time that you submitted this, it's already shifted back up. Build whatever deck you like and then work towards that is what I would suggest.
Also, keep in mind that even if your ultimate goal is to end up with a set of 40 duels, you are probably not going to buy all 40 of those duels. You will trade for some. You will win some in events. You will use store credit to get some of those. Like, it is a process, and should you find that you end up with the wrong duels at any time, like, trading exists, And blue dual lands in particular trade really fucking well. You know, you can convert those into each other pretty easily.
Another thing that I would like to say is you don't necessarily need 3 tundras or 4 tropical islands. Brian might not like this answer, but if you owned 2 of each dual land, you could probably get away with playing some surveil lands and, you know, heaven forbid, a shock land if you need to. But 1 or 2 of each dual land will actually get you very, very far. And you could probably get away with some alternative choices like triumphs or whatever in the meantime for the ones that you're missing.
Yeah, I do agree with that. People ask me all the time in my comments and stuff, like, I only have 2 trops. Can I play a breeding pool for the third one? Like, yeah, of course you can. Sometimes you're going to lose a tight game to Delver because you took 2 that a tropical island wouldn't have taken. Obviously, it is worse, but, I mean, you're in the tournament. So, do that. And as far as acquiring duels go, I'm going to co-sign what the other guy said and then move along here. But Volcanic Island is probably the safest one. If you have 4 Volcanic Islands, you can always play Is It Delver or Is It X Delver? And from the Volcanic Island, Is It Core? It's like 1 tropical island now unlocks the Questing Druid builds. And that's a deck that's going to be winning and going to be good. Like, basically, at all times, I don't even know what set of bans or printings could rotate Is It Delver Core out of playability at this point. So, if you need to pick a spot, Volcanic Island is probably pretty safe to work with. Next question, from Justice W. How do you prepare differently for paper event versus an online one? Mostly focusing on theories such as deck selection, sideboarding, meta-analysis, compared to physically managing cards and playing quickly. For example, when I'm playing Painter and MTGO, I often have Mindbreak traps in my sideboard for the Bryant Cooks of the world. And when I'm playing Eternal Weekend, these are the first cards I cut. And then a second question from KCJJ6. My local legacy scene is vibrant with 20 plus players on weeknights and quarterly win a duels up to 40. Everyone has large collections, so it's hard to pin anyone on a deck. I would love some tips, please. Casey had also asked about preparing for paper versus online decks differently, then had a little extra on their question.
So let's start with that second one because I feel like that one's easy. My biggest piece of advice here is stop trying to put them on decks ahead of time. Win round 1 quickly. Flip open your notebook to the back. Bird the room. Write down physical descriptions of players and what they are writing on. Have that prepared for your following rounds. You don't need to be a wizard who can, sit there and predict what every player in your local metagame is going to be playing at the time. Like, build a good deck that you are confident in, bird round 1, figure out what people are on, and go into the rest of the tournament with good mulligan decisions in mind.
Right. And as far, I co-sign scouting big time. I get a lot of advantage in tournaments just by looking around and seeing who's near me, especially as the tournament goes on and the field gets smaller. But as far as selection for a big tournament, whether it's online or paper, my advice a lot of the time is don't try to metagame because it doesn't matter. Legacy's so big and decks are all powerful. And when we're talking about metagaming, we're talking about do I need 2 dismembers in my sideboard for Magus of the Moon? Or should I have something else going on? Can I switch one of those to a Shouldered's Edict? We're not talking about I gotta play 8 cast, I gotta pivot off beans. Play the deck you are most confident with, understand how the pillars of the format work and what your matchups are like against them, and maybe tune some sideboard cards here and there. And do not try to just flip decks because there's some new hotness.
One thing I would like to say is I always build my decks for an open field, and that includes my sideboards. A lot of people that I know want to be local game store heroes. They're like, okay, well, I know that Brian Coval is going to be there, and there's going to be 14 people. I'm going to put 3 back to basics in my sideboard, and then they feel like a hero if they get a game off Brian. And that might feel good, but it doesn't make you a better Magic player. Like, you took an avenue that got you a game win, but ultimately you don't have the skills to beat Brian if it mattered in a large event where you weren't handicapping yourself, is what I'm trying to say here. Like, you should want to be able to beat Brian with a standard sideboard and figure out how to beat him in a proper control mirror. And that would be something that would actually elevate you for the future instead of trying to take a cheap avenue out of it. So I would just play whatever you would play at a real tournament. Don't worry about metagaming for your locals.
Also, if you make your called shot and you miss, it feels so bad. Like I remember this person. I think they drove out from Tennessee for an IQ in Roanoke. They showed up and they were like, I knew you were gonna be here. And he like flashes me 3 copies of Massacre and is like, I came ready. And I think I was like playing like Elves or Red Prison that day. I wasn't on Death and Taxes, and I was just like, oh man, you're really coming for me, huh? And I just laid it on thick.
Even if that's a 14-person tournament, they might not even play against you. Like, that sort of stuff is insane. There was a run where I was just bringing Uro-based Bant control decks to the locals for a couple months, and people started to get wise to it, and then I pivoted to Doomsday and won 2 dual lands in a weekend. Just won a tournament Saturday, won a tournament Sunday with Doomsday, and just, fuck all y'all with your whatever it is that you brought in for Uro, because whatever hand you kept here, because you're dead. There's a little bit of that to do, but in general, play the deck that you think is best and understand fundamentally how your matchups work. If you are losing all the time, it's not because you picked the wrong deck for the weekend. It's because you are not playing your deck that well. And that might be hard to hear, but there's not like a magic, oh, I got bad pairings, or I picked the wrong deck. I knew I should have played 8-cast. Like, now play a good deck with well-rounded matchups, understand how the format works, and just beat people. Next question from Jeremy G. This is Jeremy from Iron Deck, friend of the show. What are the elements that would set one Eternal event apart from another? Is it just the prize pool?
I will say that I don't travel for events that I could because I'm not interested in the prize pool. And sometimes I'll see posted like, oh, first place is a Mox Diamond. Brian Fell. What am I ever going to do with a Mox Diamond, right? But if you're converted to cash, it might be, well, the Mox Diamond is actually MP. It'd be like $500. Is that more or less incentivizing to travel across states to play for a Mox Diamond? And is a Mox Diamond worth traveling across states to play for? So the bigger the prize pool and something that has mass appeal is going to get the most people, at least in my experience. If you're like, oh, if you could play for 4 dual lands for first place or play for 5K, which is going to get more people interested. Obviously, dual lands aren't exactly 5K. I just picked a number. But usually the money amount, the monetary value is going to get more seats than just dual lands or whatever, because cash could be anything. It could be rent for that month, for example.
Yeah, this is a conversation I've had with some TOs where if the TO is just buying their cards off TCG Player or whatever, just offer the cash. But if the TO has a buying apparatus where they're getting their prize cards at buy list price, like if this is filtered through a store or a front in some way, and that $800 Underground Sea was bought for $550, you can actually inflate your prize pool or cut your costs. Like if you call it a 5K, but you actually bought all those cards at 60%, then it's probably like a 3.5K out of pocket, and then that makes it more sustainable for the TO. Or if they had 5K cash they were willing to give away, and that becomes 7 or 8K in staples, now the prize pool looks insane. So there's some stuff you could do there depending on what your goals are. Personally, I agree with Bryant. I need to be able to justify the travel costs, and I usually look at what first place is and what 8th place is when I'm deciding where I'm going, what's worth my time. Because I've had many tournaments over the years where I top 4 and get like less than my entry fee, not to mention gas, hotel, everything. I want to at least double my money if I make top 8, and I want to double that if I make top 4, and I want to be extremely happy with my experience if I win. Like driving to Columbus for me from Pittsburgh, that's 3 hours, 3.5. That's a full day, probably an overnight stay on the front or the back, and to win a Mox Diamond, that's tough. That's a tough sell for a busy adult.
I think another thing that makes events, I'm not going to say tournaments here, but makes events appealing is the multi-day aspect, where if you scrub out of a tournament, you have a chance to do something else that is meaningful. Like one of the things that I've really enjoyed about these Magic cons is that like there is just stuff going all of the time. If you are going there for a tournament specifically, you can just fire drafts afterwards. You can play in a rebound event. You can meet some cosplayers or something. I think Wizards of the Coast has realized that making events appeal to more than just the spikes results in better events.
Right. If you are trying to appeal to more than spikes, if you do just want a bunch of legacy sweaty legacy players to show up for your event. Those might be expenses that go nowhere. One thing that I have enjoyed, like buffalo chicken dip, includes food. The nominal buffalo chicken dip is available at all their events, and their more premier events, they've done like a taco bar and stuff. And like I said, being a grown up and having to decide what I'm going to do with my time compared to everything else I could be doing in life, and maybe driving out to Columbus to win a Mox Diamond's not worth it, but driving out to Columbus to have like a fun day with friends and a taco bar and, all these other things included. Tales of Adventure, back when they did the Eternal Extravaganza, they had one where they had it catered from a local deli, and they had subs and fresh fruit and just food you actually want to eat in the room. That was awesome. Just stuff like that will elevate an event for me.
All right, I'll read the next one here because you're probably going to answer it, Brian. This is from Cal, who asks, as a lover of blue-white X hard control / standstill decks, is there a reason that Shark Typhoon has fallen out of play? I haven't found Bowmaster to be much of a deterrent. Is it simply being too slow to compete with cards like Grief and Scam?
It's the shell. The shell collapsed. The card Shark Typhoon isn't a deck. The card Shark Typhoon is a card that goes in a deck as part of a plan. And the things that would set up a deck that wants to play Shark Typhoon, like Staff of the Storyteller, or Teferi Time Raveler, or Narset, are just heinous against Orcish Bowmaster. And you could still play these decks. You have to stack harder against Bowmaster than you ever did before. Or I don't know what you're doing with Shark Typhoon. That's the important part of the question. But I did release a Shark Still deck on my channel yesterday at the time of this release, maybe today at the time of this release, whenever this comes out. But spoiler, I beat every deck that didn't drop multiple Bowmasters against me, and I lost to the opponent who drew 2 or 3 Bowmasters per game. And that was how it went. You could still play these decks, just make sure that you respect the hell out of Orcish Bowmaster. Next question. This is from Colton M. Could you tell us your favorite Magic cards and a short story behind why you love them? Also, Storm Forever Tendrils Baby. And then a related question from Matt M. What has been your favorite deck to play across any format and era? If it's a past deck, what would that deck need to be played in the current meta?
I'll start. So I agree with Storm Forever Tendrils Baby. That was really smart. Big agree. Galvanic Relay is probably my current favorite card. However, when I was a young up-and-comer, my favorite deck was actually Esper Angel Control, that Exalted Angel and Skeletal Scrying in it. And it was a very early Legacy deck in like 2004. And that was a deck that I cut my teeth on, and I grew to love Exalted Angel. I still have my original foil playset of Exalted Angels. I even bought a Japanese foil later on in time, and sometimes I'll just open up my binder and stare at them and go like, a better era. And I really do miss that deck, and I love Exalted Angel. And then for Matt's question, my favorite deck to play across all formats, like obviously I love the Epic Storm, but my second favorite deck is Cycle Storm and Pauper. That deck is just so much fun, and there's so many little intricate decisions that control how a game plays out. And I really like Pauper for that reason, because sometimes making tons of small decisions just feels way more rewarding than playing a big dumb haymaker and then just winning the game on the back of that. And sometimes it feels like that era of Magic is gone, but you still get that in Pauper.
So I am a well-known Vampire Nighthawk stan. That is my favorite card of all time. That was the first Magic card that I ever purchased as a single. I bought 4 of them and put them into I think it was a Dark Steel Precon that I bought as my first deck. And I was like, I'm unbeatable. How do I ever lose now that I have Vampire Nighthawk? And I still think that is just one of the best designed Magic cards of all time. Just like, it's a perfect Magic card.
Nice.
My favorite deck of all time is Modern Splinter Twin, and we know what needs to happen for that to be playable. WotC.
They need to unban Splinter Twin and then unprint all the Modern Horizon sets? Is that what you mean?
Let me at least try. Let me try and fail.
Didn't Blake on stream recently say that it was never going to be unbanned?
Yeah, probably, but they also said once that Power 9 would never come to Magic Online, so never say never. My favorite card, I have so many favorites, but I'm going to go with Tinker for the purposes of this question. The card, I mean, obviously just busted in twain. Like, what do you like about Tinker, Brian? Fucking it wins the game. How about that? But so one of the first decks that I really built on purpose was the Bosch Iron Golem Grixis Artifacts deck that won one of the Pro Tours in like 2001, 2002, or it must have been 03 because Mirrodin had just come out. That was '03, right? I think so. Like early 2003. And that's one of the decks, like Phil said about Vampire Nighthawk. Like I went to the store with a Inquest magazine in hand and the deck list, and I was like, I need Ancient Tombs, City of Traders, Tinkers, one copy of Bosch Iron Golem, Origin Story, hello. That was just a really cool deck. The first one I really built that was really just effing good. And Tinker has just, it's my favorite card to first pick in Vintage Cube. It's one of my favorite cards to cast in Vintage. Tinker's great. And it's also part of the BoshNRoll Origin Story. Favorite deck to play across any format and era? I got to shout out Modern Quark Clan Ironworks combo. That deck, by the end of the season, the last season it was legal. It was just an extension of my fingers, extension of my body and mind into the cards. I conceded the finals of 4 PTQs that season because I knew I would just win one when I felt like it. And I did win the last one of the season that I could play in, and nobody could touch me on that deck. And, like Phil, what needs to happen to bring it back is they need to unban it. Please.
All right, our next question comes from Eliana. Hey, y'all. With WotC seemingly embracing or at least acknowledging CEDH in a more significant way, what do you think is the ceiling for officially sanctioned CEDH event? What changes, aside from the proxy issue, do you see arising in this potential process? Tally-ho, Cathars.
It seems like the biggest restriction on CEDH tournaments right now is how many tables they can fit in the room. These things sell out sometimes in 5-10 minutes. Tickets are gone. One of the TOs that I talked to told me their registration bot caught a scalper trying to buy 25 tickets in a shot. And that's where we are. These are like Taylor Swift tickets to get into a CEDH tournament right now. Obviously, reserve list cards are going to restrict the thing, but this topic kind of came up in a different way on the Color of Magic podcast last week. Daquan Watson, one of the hosts of that pod, he was talking about the cost of conventions and $700 Black Lotus entry to MagicCon. That's too expensive. Well, it sold out in 6 hours, so it's not too expensive. It's just too expensive for you. And that you might not like that answer, but CEDH events, if they start running no proxy, the people who own the cards will fill those events. And that means it's not too expensive. It is just unfortunate for certain people in certain spots. And I think the thing holding back sanctioned CEDH is that the community is so proxy friendly, but which obviously adds players. And we did a whole episode about this. Please don't make me do it again. But the community, when the TOs stop allowing proxies and Wizards is allowed to work with them because they're a company built on selling cards, that's what's going to cut this really loose.
To piggyback on what Brian said, I believe the mindset needs to change. We had an episode 2 episodes ago about Magic Online and them starting to support CEDH. Well, tweets since then have been like, well, why would I spend $200 on a CEDH deck, or why would I pay for a rental account? I have a printer. And it's like, well, that's a bad way to think if you want to grow the CEDH community to be even larger. Yeah, you can keep on playing meaningless spell table games, but right now there's also people out there grinding Magic Online trophies and pushing the format forward. Do you want to be a part of that, or do you want to be an anchor?
I also think that it would not be surprising to see a CEDH Pro Tour-ish caliber event over the course of the next few years. It is very clear that WotC is interested in the format. I don't know if we push it quite to Pro Tour, but a CEDH massive huge prize pool event at a MagicCon, that seems like it's an obvious step forward.
Yeah, kind of already happening. They are partnered with the biggest CEDH TO in the space. They're using their software. All of that has happened at the last couple of MagicCons, and there's even more events using that software and using that for Amsterdam coming up, the next MagicCon. So they're in the space. They clearly got feelers out. Just getting away from proxies, however that looks, and some percentage of the current player base or future player base won't like that answer. And if it's selling out, it's not too expensive. It's just too expensive for you. And sorry, but business moves forward. Okay. So we are 50 minutes into the episode, and we've answered 11 of the 20 questions that we received. So we're not going to get through all of them. We will save some of them for the next episode, and we'll just do a couple more for this one. Thank you for the response. We decided not to curate this or anything. Just answer the questions as they came, and we're going to get, looks like, at least 1.5, maybe 2 episodes out of them. Next question is from Beholder Gaming. What is your favorite comic book and anime character, and could they be roommates for 6 months? And follow-up question from the same person. What is your favorite set to draft, and could you survive there as just you?
Ooh. All right. Draft portion first. I think I need a little time to think about the first portion. I think very fondly back to triple RTR, Return to Ravnica drafts, because I just did 1 or 2 of those a week in grad school. I enjoyed that format a lot. I also enjoyed original Innistrad block a lot. I think it was Dark Ascension had like the spider spawning archetype that was a lot of fun to draft. I look back fondly at that format. But of recent stuff, the Lord of the Rings set was a fucking blast.
Yeah, I'm gonna... Oh, well, could you survive in any of those locations as just Phil Gallagher?
I am not a particularly strong or fit person. Maybe Lord of the Rings. I get in good with some elves. I could survive that posh life.
Okay. I'm going to co-sign Innistrad as one of the all-time best draft sets. It's the one that I got the most reps in and was the best. There are better ones that I haven't drafted much of throughout time, especially some of the more recent sets that have been getting rave reviews. I've heard Outlaws of Thunder Junction is going to be an all-timer, but I haven't drafted it yet. So I'm also going to go with Innistrad. And as far as could I survive, there is just me. If we talk about this practically, I think kind of a weak or small human is a 1/1. That's pretty standard stats. I think I'm probably a 1/2. Like, I think I would beat a goblin in combat without trading with it. It would hurt, but I think I'd kill it without dying. That's how I'm getting to 1/2. And I think with training, I could become maybe a 2/2 and maybe get first strike. Well, 2/2 is insane because that's a bear. I would not beat a bear hand to hand. So maybe with training, I could get to like a 2/1 first strike, where like if I have a weapon, if I have a lance, maybe I could take down a bear. But if it gets past the lance, I'm dead, which is how first strike works. So I'm definitely never getting to 3 on any stats because those are elephants. Like, I think I'm probably a 1/2 with no abilities. And with training, I could get to like 2/2 first strike. And I probably would not survive in Innistrad with those stats.
I'll answer the first part of the question, which is favorite comic book. I'm actually a huge comic book person. My setup used to be facing my comic book wall, but then I rotated it. I have a boatload. I have an entire shelf or bookshelf of just like Batman family comic books. But what really got me into it is right after college, a friend of mine for my birthday bought me the first 3 trade paperbacks of Y the Last Man. And I was like, well, I'm not really into comic books. And he was just like, Bryant, just read them. You'll like them. And that was my gateway drug. And then, after that, I started reading The Walking Dead because I liked the show. And before you knew it, I was buying the Nightfall series for Batman. And I was just hooked every night. I would come home from work. I didn't play Magic Online at the time. So if I wasn't playing locals, I was reading comic books. And it just, I love it till this day. So big fan of that. I'm not really into animes, and I'm not really a drafter, but I did really enjoy the Throne of Eldraine limited set. I loved drafting the mono blue mill deck there.
Would you survive in Eldraine as Brian Cook?
It's a bunch of fairy tales, right? Like, they can't be that strong, right? Gingerbread men? I could definitely eat a gingerbread man.
Guess what? You're an elk. I'll do my best to answer the comic book question. So my comic book exposure is through films based on comic books or the encyclopedias that compile all of the characters in comic books. Like, I have actually read very few comic books in life, but I'm pretty apprised on comic book characters. And I don't know if they're my favorites, but I think it would be fun to watch Deadpool and Roanoke Zoro share an apartment for 6 months. They both wield swords. They both are either impervious to harm or heal quickly, it seems. They're both smartasses. I think that would be fun to watch them interact.
Yeah, I think I would get a weird pleasure out of watching Iron Man room with some yandere anime chick like Yuno Gasai. Yandere being kind of the crazy, overly obsessive woman archetype that is common to anime. that would probably be fun to watch for a little while. But somebody's dead before the 6 months is up for sure.
Nice. So we have hit the hour mark, and I think that's a fun one to end on. And then we'll save a bunch of questions for next time. Sound good, gentlemen?
Sounds great.
All right. Thank you, everyone who submitted questions. We will not be taking more because we probably have another episode here still in the bank. Shout out to the patrons who sent all these in, and thank you all for listening.